former governor of the Bank of England and the man tipped to be the next Liberal Party leader and Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney. I began by asking him for his immediate reaction to the tariffs.
Well, look, I think President Trump probably thinks that we in Canada will cave in, but we are going to stand up to a bully. We're not going to back down. We're united, and we will retaliate.
And the effect of this on the US and on Canada economically?
Well, ultimately, the steps that the president is taking against Canada, contemplating, I guess, as well against Mexico, China, others, and threatening the world are going to rebound negatively on the United States. They're going to hit growth. They're going to move up inflation. They're going to raise interest rates. They're going to damage the U.S.'s reputation around the world. I mean, let's be absolutely clear. This is the second time in less than 10 years, less than 8 years, that the United States has, in effect, ripped up a trade agreement with its closest trading partner that it negotiated in good faith.
There's no doubt from your perspective that Mexico-Canada agreement, what used to be NAFTA, has been ripped up tonight.
Well, it's the U.S. is violating it. Listen, I'll speak from the perspective of Canada. The justification, purported justification for these tariffs is the cross-border movement of fentanyl and illegal immigrants. And just to compare, and you will have heard this before, but it bears repeating, that in both cases, if you compare Canada relative to Mexico, the proportions are less than 1% of illegal drugs, by the way, that are all driven across the border by Americans in terms of the seizures that we've seen. Less than 1% that crosses the southern border. And it's similar numbers, less than 1% in terms of illegal immigrants. There is no national security justification for this. It's the purported justification. Justice in the United States moves slowly through the courts, but this is a violation of the trade agreement.
But it's pretty clear that the US president has a bit of a fixation on Canada and on the trade deficit that is run. He thinks that America's being ripped off, although that's not the reason he's giving tonight.
Well, yes, you've just shifted the justification, as the president sometimes does. The United States runs a deficit with Canada only because of energy, because of U.S. imports, largely of oil, and as well as electricity. So that's what runs a deficit versus Canada, where that's not being ripped off. In fact, we sell that energy, particularly the oil, at a discount to world prices to Americans. So perhaps we should ask for that subsidy back.
I mean, it's pretty clear that he thinks your country can be pushed around.
We can.
And you talked about retaliation. You want to be Prime Minister in weeks. What does that look like? Well,
the first thing is we have a lot of cards. We're keeping them close to our chests. We'll start playing a few. Those decisions are for the current government. I've been in close contact with our main negotiators, our foreign affairs minister, our finance minister, who've been in Washington, our public safety minister has also been down. We will take steps. I think it's reasonable to expect in the immediate term that we will match dollar for dollar the U.S. tariffs. We will target our tariffs against those goods and services that will most affect the United States and least affect Canada. But to be clear, this will have an impact on the Canadian economy, and that impact will be felt more quickly and to a greater extent than the U.S. But Canadians are in no mood to make any concessions here. This is entirely unjustified. And we have many other options that we don't want to deploy, but we will if we have to.
Well, could you imagine, for example, trying to target the Trump circle, perhaps tariffing Tesla's electricity, energy, potash, for example?
We have a deep strategic relationship that's been violated. As I said a moment ago, it is sensible in a negotiation to target our measures where they have the greatest impact to those who are making the decisions. So all options are on the table in that respect. The second thing I'd say, though, I'd underscore that what we are going to do, or at least what we will do if I'm successful and am Prime Minister by the middle of March, is to reinforce our economy, reinforce growth in our economy with a series of major measures. I'd remind, we're a AAA country. We have a lot of resources, fiscal resources in the country. We have tremendous resources, full stop. And we actually have a lot more in common with a lot of other major economies around the world. And over time, we will look to diversify.
Well, that's an interesting point. I mean, what do you want the rest of the world, the G7, the EU, the UK, to do in the face of what you call bullying from the White House?
Well, it's not what I call, it is. That's what it is. The second thing is that if I were one of those jurisdictions, I would take this as a precursor of what's coming there. Secondly, I think, one of the issues is who is like-minded here, who respects their trading arrangements, who, for example, earlier today, we proposed some major changes to our climate policy, enhancing our climate change policy, our emissions policy here in Canada, including the way we would treat our trading partners. That bears much more similarity to what the United Kingdom is doing with respect to climate, and the European Union. So, look, there are some pretty major economies, ourselves included, that think a lot more alike on trade, a lot more like the way the United States used to think on trade, and there's huge opportunity in that respect.
I mean, to be a little bit more candid, would you expect some help, some solidarity from the likes of the UK, or might it be that the UK thinks, well, if we're a bit quiet, we won't get hit by these Trump tariffs ourselves?
Good luck. Good luck with that. Look, we're not looking for help. What we look for, we can stand on our own. But what I would point out is that the system is being changed in real time by these actions, if they are followed through. And that means that major economies, major like-minded economies with the same values, and I do think Canada shares many values with the United Kingdom, with the European Union, a number of countries in Asia, in fact, in effect, the G7, with the exception of the United States as it's currently acting. And that creates opportunity. Looking at commercial relationships in any of those countries, Canada included, we have to look at the world as it is now, not as it used to be or as we would have wanted it to be.
So, for example, the rest of the G7 might levy a carbon border tax on America, in a coordinated fashion?
Look, I conscious that Canada is the president of the G7 this year, conscious of the fact that I might be Prime Minister in the not too distant future. I'm not going to make declarations on behalf of the G7. I'll observe the following, that the United Kingdom, the European Union, Canada as with the current government, Canada under my government, is making major efforts with respect to reducing emissions, building the competitiveness of our companies, creating the jobs of the future in a clean economy. And it only makes sense, if you are doing that, to have the type of trading protections for your companies that are making those efforts compared to those in other countries that are not. And so the US is going through a period where it is turning inward. It's seeking to turn back the clock on these issues. It's almost as if there is a fever that is raging there. Eventually that fever will pass, but in the meantime, we see an opportunity for Canada. We see an opportunity for Canada with like-minded countries to continue to make progress in this respect. And I would expect that over time, there will be a coming together on it.
And obviously for people back in the UK, this is a new Mark Carney that we're seeing. It is today, I think almost to the hour, the 5th anniversary of Brexit. People are reflecting. Have you sort of changed any of your views on the economic impact of that?
Well, I think, unfortunately, the United Kingdom is living with the economic impact of that decision. This is a case where I wish I were wrong or had been wrong about the likely economic impact. And I guess the point I would make to bring it to the current situation is we know what the economic impact of these measures that the United States is undertaking is going to be. It takes a bit of time for those economic impacts to follow through. It will be harmful for the United States. It will be harmful for their trading partners. It's naive to pretend otherwise. It's naive to pretend the world is as it was. The United States has to reestablish its credibility as a trading partner. And the rest of us need to work together, or should look to work together, to take advantage of the situation in the interests of our citizens, for me in Canada, and for the UK government, for the citizens of the United Kingdom.
Well, we'll leave that there. Thanks very much for joining us there from Nova Scotia, Mark Carney, former Governor of the Bank of England and Prime Ministerial candidate in Canada.